everyone, my name is Jenny Medrano and I am the Shift Program Manager at Building Bridges, and this video is on the topic of intersectionality. So before I jump into what that is, I want to give credit where it's due, and that is to a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. So that's Kimberle with an accent over the E if you want to look her up. She coined this term first, and she used it to kind of dive into her unique identity as a Black woman and to explore the oppression of women of color, how multiple identities intersect, and how sometimes this compounded oppression of being Black and being a woman can further marginalize you in society. So, at Building Bridges, we love to talk about intersectionality because it's something that helps us further explain how your different identities intersect and work together to affect your life experience. So, some of your identities, a few of them might be age, class, race, religion, ability level, citizenship status. All of these identities matter in terms of how you're navigating your daily life. Sometimes we don't think about some of the identities, and that can kind of block us from true identity development. So at Building Bridges, we like to dive into the development of talking about each of these identities and how much privilege and oppression you hold in each. So we've created a tool called the Identity Wheel that we use to help further dive into intersectionality, which I'm going to show you. Okay, so you're lucky because you get a sneak peek into one of the workshops we do on intersectionality and identities. Typically, we use this handout right here, and it talks about the identity wheel and all the different identities you can hold. This one's bilingual because we do all types of workshops, even in Spanish, but we're not going to use that. So we're going to use this wheel on the board instead, because it's big and it'll show what we do and how we plot our identities, how we think through our identities. What we typically do is have each person take their identity wheel and think through the following identities: race, ability, class, citizenship status, gender, age, religion, and sexual orientation. And those are just 8 identities. They're not all of the identities someone can have, but these help us kind of dive into a deeper discussion around identity. And what we do is we plot each identity along the line based on how much power that we feel. So if you feel a lot of power in that identity, you will go along the outside, and if you feel very little power, you will go in the middle. No power, all the power. That's how we start our discussions. But really, we're actually talking about the terms privilege and oppression. So this outskirt of the circle, when we talk about a lot of power, we're actually talking about privilege. And then inside the circle, we're actually talking about oppression and how little power you feel in society. So I'm going to take some time to reflect on my own identities, what each one of these are. So for example, I might put for gender, I would put female. For citizenship status, I would put a U.S. citizen. For race, I would put Mexican American. It's kind of ethnicity, but for me it goes hand in hand, and so on. So I'm going to do that for each of my identities. Take some time to reflect on how little power or how much power I feel with them. Okay, so I've taken some time to plot each of my identities, and I put a dot on the line with the spectrum being pretty oppressed or no power to a lot of privilege and lots of power. As you can see, each of these dots are in different places, and that's okay because that shows the complexity of my identity and how much privilege and oppression I'm carrying at all times. Honestly, if you were to ask me to plot these identities 3 years ago, they would have been totally different. Because a lot of times your perception of how much power you have or how much privilege and oppression you have changes over time, especially as you gain more awareness of the place you hold in society. So this is an example, and during a typical discussion, we might ask participants to expand on some of these identities. For example, which was the hardest identity to plot and why? For me, I would say, citizenship status is always pretty hard for me to plot because I am a US citizen. However, I also feel like as a Latina, sometimes the assumptions that are made about me and how I look can connect to whether or not people assume that I'm a citizen or even assume that my parents are citizens. So I don't feel like full power, like I could just walk around and people are like, of course you're here. You were born in the US. I actually get the question, where are you from? All the time. But where are you really from? And then they're trying to ask like where my parents are from. So that's why it was like kind of hard to plot, but I ended up putting it here because I still feel some power around being born in the US. That's just one example, but we could really go into depth with each of these. One thing to note is that we never really want to force anything on our participants, so if there's any of these identities that they don't want to talk about, we would just ask them to put a dot in the middle, and they could totally choose on what they want to expand on or not. We're not trying to out anybody, especially with some pretty sensitive topics that are on this wheel. So that's the identity wheel. I'm excited to announce that if your curiosity is piqued and you want to learn more about how we use this tool and how to dive into your own identity, we have a video series this February that is going to be focused on intersectionality and working through varying levels of privilege and oppression with each identity. So tune in every Monday of February at noon to learn more about the different staff and interns at Building Bridges. I will be interviewing each person, and they will have something that's a little bit more exciting than this template. It's actually going to be a wheel inspired by the show Wheel of Fortune, which is a show I grew up watching. I don't know if Generation Z, if you know anything about that, but for me it was a huge part of my childhood. And basically there's this huge wheel that people spin for money, and well, it's actually like this, I guess, but either way, we're going to have a wheel that has the identities. Each person's going to spin it 3 times, and then whatever 3 identities that lands on, the person can opt in on which identity they'd like to share about and how the intersection of those identities has worked out in their daily life. So together, we can learn about this concept.